What is going on, everybody? How you doing? I am your humble guide, Stagtastic, coming back at you in Way of the Hunter. On behalf of the entire Bear River Hunt Club, we want to welcome you in and say thank you for your continued support, because without you, none of this is possible. Today, we are going to be looking at mastering and managing two newly introduced weapons into Way of the Hunter with the addition of the Aurora Shores DLC release. Of course, you know it, those are going to be the Harp Wonder Hit Crossbow, which is a pulley action crossbow rated for Tier 2 through Tier 5 animals. And then of course we have the Buffton Apex Predator Crossbow, which is a recurve action crossbow, and this one is rated for Tier 2 all the way up to Tier 6 animals. Let me just say that at first, when the crossbows came out and I started using them, I was not a fan. I didn't like the crossbows at all. Ultimately, to me, they seemed pretty weak and not as fun to use as opposed to a recurve bow or even a traditional bow. I mean, you think about it, it's like shooting a gun. You load your dart, you pull the trigger. Big whoop, am I right? But perhaps the biggest drawback that I found to using crossbows is the amount of time that it takes to reload a single bolt after you fire. I mean, my goodness, heaven forbid you actually miss your target and you gotta reload and try to get another shot off before your animal runs off. So at the end of the day, it just seemed like a whole lot of work and time wasted with not a lot of reward for your efforts. However, I was determined to get better with the crossbow, and after several weeks of use, I have come to enjoy the crossbows extensively. And quite frankly, at this time, in my opinion, the crossbow is by far the most OP weapon in Way of the Hunter. I mean, you think about it, a weapon that can bring down Tier 2 through Tier 6 animals and not lose any kind of hunting stars, regardless of how close they are to you. I mean, come on. This thing is absolutely OP in all regards. So in my opinion, you need to learn how to use the crossbow because, again, it is one of the most OP weapons in the game and you're not going to regret getting to learn how to use it. With that said, let's go ahead and dive into some of the most important factors that you're going to need to consider in order to become an expert with the crossbow. And let me say this, if you stick around to the end of the video, I am going to show you a really cool trick to maximize your distance while using the Zoom XD optic on either crossbow. Ultimately, this is going to earn you an additional 15 to 18 meters in distance depending on which crossbow you're using, so you're not going to want to miss out on that information. When it comes to the crossbows, there are three factors that we need to consider, and that is the power, the range, and shot placement. So let's talk about the power of the crossbow. At first, when you look at the amount of energy or the amount of joules that the crossbow puts out, it can actually be kind of confusing and underwhelming at the same time. At least it was for me. Because by all accounts, with the amount of joules that we're getting, we should only really be allowed to hunt Tier 1 animals. But let me just encourage you, don't get caught up in all that. Without going into too much detail about it, it is sufficient to say that if the crossbow is rated for a particular tiered animal, it will kill it. Period. In fact, I actually did an extensive amount of testing and I was actually able to take down every single Tier 6 animal in the game with the Harp Wonder Hit Crossbow. Now granted, most of those shots had to be within 40 meters, but it got the job done. In fact, the bison had to be within 20 meters. So if you aren't going to get the Aurora Shores DLC to be able to unlock the Apex Predator crossbow, then you have absolutely nothing to worry about, because the Harp Wonder Hit Crossbow is really all you need, even for Tier 6 animals. One major factor that you're going to need to keep in mind is the wind. Unlike bullets, which can really cut through the wind and travel at high velocities relatively easy, the bolts in your crossbow can and will get carried away by the wind very easily. So keep that in mind if you're going to be using the crossbow, and really try to set yourself up in a good position where the wind won't play as much of a factor into your hunt. Wind becomes less of a factor the closer you are to your target. So if you're taking these really long shots on a windy day, just know that your bolt could move several feet or even several yards if you're not being careful. So be prepared to counter this and either sneak up a little bit closer to your animal, or what you should really do is call those animals in closer to you with your callers and try to make the wind less of an issue for yourself. So again, don't get caught up in the amount of joules that the crossbow is putting out. If it is rated for that tier animal, it will kill it. The next thing that we need to discuss is the optimal range for each crossbow. Now, we are given the choice between two different optics. We have the Zoom XD True Sight, and then you have the red dot sight. Now, when you look down your crossbow, you're going to see a couple of orange dots. These orange dots are your markers to tell you how far a particular target is. So, in order for you to really master the crossbow and get the most out of it, then I really want to explain the difference between these distant markers without using hunter sense. In other words, let's just go ahead and pretend that we don't have hunter sense to help us cheat at where the bolt is going to be landing. Let's just say that we have to go off of the dots that are in our scope. This kind of reality is really true for anyone playing on the Ranger difficulty, because hunter sense is disabled on the Ranger difficulty. You can't use it. So if I'm looking downrange with just using my binoculars and my scope, how am I supposed to be able to tell where my dart will fall on the target? Maybe I'll shoot too high, maybe I'll shoot too low, but obviously I want to be able to hit my target every single time. How can we do that? Well, that's exactly why you have me, to give you all that information. So if you have your phone handy, or if you want to try to take a screenshot on your computer, then let me encourage you to go ahead and get ready to do that, because I am about to be breaking down what each of those orange dots is sighted in for. Before I do this, let me just say that in order for this to work, in order for these different distances to work, then you're going to need to be zoomed in all the way while using the Zoom XD. So go ahead and remember that. Go ahead and zoom all the way into that 5x magnification for this to work. However, and I cannot stress this enough, do not adjust what your zero is. Leave your zero at 20 meters, otherwise it throws everything off. And this is one of those weird inconsistencies that I picked up on early on. So if you start messing with all that, then ultimately those orange dots become extremely irrelevant. It throws everything off. And at the end of the day, that is not what we want. We want to be able to pull up our binoculars, see how far we are, and immediately know which distance marker we need to be holding that target at, especially if we're on the Ranger difficulty. So here we go. Let's go ahead and take a look at the red dot sight distances. Obviously, the red dot is a 1x magnification, so you're not going to be able to zoom in or out regardless. But remember, do not zero in your optics. So as you can see here, on the left side we have our Harp Wonder Hit distance markers, and on the right side we have our Apex Predator distance markers. So this is the time where you're going to be wanting to take that screenshot, write it down, take a picture, do whatever you need to do in order to remember these distances for the Harp Wonder Hit and the Apex Predator crossbow. I actually have a little piece of paper at my desk with all these different distances written down, and I use it as my own personal cheat sheet whenever I'm using the crossbow. Because again, I want to be able to just pull up my binoculars, see what distance I'm at, and as you can see, if I'm using the Harp Wonder Hit, if I'm within 45 meters, I know exactly where my marker needs to be. I know exactly where I'm going to be holding on a target. And of course, the same can be said for the Apex Predator. Now let's go ahead and move on to the Zoom XD True Sight. So again, on the left side we have our Harp Wonder Hit crossbow distances, and on the right side we have the Apex Predator crossbow distances. And as you can see, the Apex Predator really starts to outperform the Harp Wonder Hit really early on. The second orange dot being 35 meters for the Harp Wonder Hit, but already at 50 meters for the Apex Predator crossbow. And then of course the distance grows the lower you go, all the way out to a max, I'll say it again, a max distance of 80 meters with the Harp Wonder Hit crossbow, but 115 meters with the Apex Predator crossbow. Lastly, let's talk about shot placement. Just like using a rifle when shooting wild game, you should be aiming in line with or just behind the front leg, depending on which animal you're hunting, but below the spine. This is why understanding animal anatomy is so crucial to hunting. In general, however, if you hit anything in line with or just behind the front leg and below the spine, then you're almost always guaranteed a kill because it's going to get at least one lung. So in addition to the preferred broadside shot while using crossbows or recurves or traditional bows, you also have a frontal shot at your disposal. But this shot comes with a lot of risk and really should only be taken if you are extremely confident with your bow. But for most players and hunters, they don't really know how to get a broadside shot on an animal, especially if you called the animal into you and they're walking straight towards you in a straight line, head on, coming at you. For those of you who are struggling with this, here is my solution for you that you can go out and practice doing. Once you have called your wild game within killing distance, then let me encourage you to just wait a few seconds for that animal to lose interest. Once he or she loses interest, they will always turn away either left or right and ultimately expose themselves to a broadside shot for a brief second or two before they turn all the way around and start walking away. This is your window of opportunity to let your crossbow do its thing and let that bolt get to work, and it gets them every single time. Of course, the more you practice doing this, the better your timing will get, and the more comfortable you're gonna be with getting them in close and then getting that broadside shot on when they turn around. But ultimately, probably the number one thing that's gonna help you take more game is learning each animal's anatomy so that you know exactly where to shoot your crossbow. So aim for the lungs primarily, but as you get more experienced, go ahead and see if you can't try to knock on their heart as much as you can to ultimately put them down much quicker than a lung shot would do. Now before we go, there are two final tips that I want to share with you quickly before I reveal a very nice trick to maximize your range when using the Zoom XD optic. If you learn to utilize these two tips, then your success with the crossbow will increase tremendously. Tip number one is going to be learn to be patient when using the crossbow. You cannot afford to rush your hunts. Unlike with a rifle, which can reach out and touch an animal at 1,000+ yards, your crossbow is extremely limited, and the last thing you want to do is spend 20 minutes of your valuable time stalking your prey only to rush your shot placement and have the animal run off and never be seen again because you got a little bit impatient. Using the crossbow, hunts will take anywhere from 2 to 3 times longer simply because your only real chances of shooting an animal is to call it in close to you or be in the right place at the right time. Although it is possible to sneak up on animals, it's not really the preferred or most effective way of hunting with a crossbow. Which leads me to my second point. You are going to need to learn to become a calling professional with the callers in the game. Learn when and when not to call an animal. A typical calling session goes something like this. You're out there in the woods, you see the deer there, so you let off a deer call. If any of those deer are interested in your call, they will begin to walk towards you. After several seconds of walking towards you, what they're going to do is they're going to stop, they'll look around, and they're going to be listening. Ultimately, they're trying to find where you're at. Once you see them stop in their tracks and start looking around and trying to find you, and in fact they may let out a call themselves to try to find you, that is the perfect time to call back. And if you look at the little bar indicator for your caller, it's usually going to be in that last quarter of the bar. This is when you want to call back. Once you've done that, they will continue to come towards you. Now, if you're calling to something blind, let's say that they're over a hill or in a valley and you don't have a visual on them fully, just remember, call again when that bar reaches that last quarter. That's usually going to be the best time to call again on any of the callers in the game. If you call too early or call too late, you really do run the risk of spooking the wildlife because your calling intervals are not consistent to what it should sound like. I should note that not all animals call back. Like bears, for example, they don't call back when they answer the call, so try to have a visual on what you're calling in. But even when you don't have a visual and nothing's calling back to you, just try to stay consistent and try to call back within that last quarter of the white bar. And that's everything that you need to know about using crossbows. Was my information helpful to you? If so, consider hitting the like button, comment on something that you learned or something that you think I may have missed. And then let me encourage you to hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you a thing, but it means a whole lot to me. We cannot do this without subscribers and people like you who support our channel. Now, if you stuck around to the end, I promised you a very cool way to increase your range with the Zoom XD sight. So here you go, your reward for sticking it out all the way to the end of the video. As you can see here, we are looking down the Zoom XD True Sight optic, and on the left side we have our Harp Wonder Hit, and on the right side we have the Apex Predator. If you want to increase your distance, you could use that little black line in the center of the reticle, and at the tip of that black line it is 88 meters for the Harp Wonder Hit and 130 meters for the Apex Predator. So just knowing this little bit of extra information increases your distance all that much more. And that's it, y'all. Thank you so much for sticking around with me to the end. I hope you learned a thing or two or three. As always, I am your humble guide, Stagtastic. We hope to see you back here really soon. Happy hunting, and take care.